Cool. Really excited for everyone to be here. Thanks for coming. I'm just going to do the introductions and kind of moderate what's happening today. So first, introductions to myself. I'm Amin Shaki. I work for InfoTrust. We are a web analytics consulting and product technology company. We're based out of Cincinnati, Ohio. We have offices in Europe, in Dubai. We were just talking about that. Consultants all over. And now in Chicago, as of the last 4 or 5 months. I moved here, settling here and kind of partnered up with 1871. This is where our offices are. And one thing that we really like doing across all of our offices is host Web Analytics Wednesday sessions. Who knows or has ever heard of Web Analytics Wednesday? Interesting. Okay, cool. Well, there you go. There you go. Big proponent of Web Analytics Wednesday. And basically what this is, what we've done in the last couple of years with this in the various cities we host it, it's a session that we have either every month, every other month, once a quarter, depending on interest, just to bring practitioners or experts together to learn and talk about digital analytics. What's happening in the industry or a hot topic, what have you. So typically we would do either a speaker or just a networking session to talk among ourselves as being in the industry or hoping to get into the industry for those of you looking to do that. So the community is what we make of it. You guys are the first for at least the 1871 InfoTrust partnership and launch here in Chicago. So welcome, thank you for coming again. Today's session we have awesome panelist speakers here that are also affiliated in some way with 1871. Basically I worked with the 1871 crew to say, who can we ask to maybe join us, partner together? They gave me a big list, and these are the amazing speakers that volunteered first and were disqualified. But I'm going to let them introduce themselves and how they fit in the digital analytics world. I'll start with Carrie for introductions, and we can just go down the row. Does that work for you guys? Okay, cool.
Hi, Carrie Sullivan. I'm the CEO and founder of Modernization Strategy Group. I've spent most of my career in marketing, sales, and around operations. A lot of it building databases. So I've been dealing with a lot of CRM data, customer data, and operations and financial data for a very long time. My business now is focused on digital transformation. We are very data focused and data science focused. So we focus on AI, IoT, and blockchain technologies and how they impact enterprise and mid-market companies.
Alex Kastrunas. My day job, I'm the Vice President of Product and Advanced Analytics at Rocket Wagon here in Chicago. We specialize in end-to-end connected smart solutions and advanced analytics, basically AI, machine learning, that sort of thing. I also have a side business called Architect, where I also do advanced analytics, education, training, and speaking and writing services. I'm also currently writing a O'Reilly book on artificial intelligence, as well as created and teach live 3 AI classes on O'Reilly's Safari platform. Taught data science for General Assembly for a while, have a blog, have a podcast, so I don't ever sleep, but basically, yeah, kind of AI, machine learning, kind of my thing. Yep.
Hi, my name is Kim Brown. I have somewhat of a similar portfolio career. So I'm the founder of Centrally Human, and the focus is really, kind of to your point, what do you do with the data and the digital once you have it? So translating that back in to facilitate real human connections. So how do we use all this digital data and technology to create those meaningful connections? I work with a lot of companies, GE, all the way down to some startups here at 1871. I've been in digital for over 15 years, in marketing and sales, and absolutely love data, love connectivity, less on the CRM database side and more on the application of it once you have it, to try and connect those groups. I also am writing a book, and I'm an author and do a lot of speaking as well, and then I also guest lecture at the universities in Chicago. And I'm really happy to be here.
Good evening, I'm Salem. I'm the founder and CEO of Accentage. We are a digital agency. We provide digital transformation as well as analytics and cloud services to our clients. What I did right before this was I managed digital platforms and web analytics and cloud infrastructure for a large biopharmaceutical company called AbbVie, which is a $30 billion company that makes Humira and other drugs. And as I was doing that and I was deeply involved in the transformation of AbbVie, I realized that I didn't have the companies that I wanted as partners to help effectively transform AbbVie. So I created that company, and that's how Accentage was formed. We started in April, and we have now been working with major pharmaceutical companies to really help them transform in their web analytics and analytics areas in terms of the biogenics and informatics areas, as well as data lakes, and then also some insurance industry clients where we are working with the application of artificial intelligence into the whole insurance workflows.
I'm Pete Lee. I'm here to listen to these guys because that's an amazing background. That's pretty awesome. So I'm VP of Sales for LiveTile. So honestly, what we're trying to do with AI is get people into chatbots as quickly as possible, so that people can start understanding what a conversation is like with some sort of predictive interface, so that they can experience it. And as the technology catches up, that's when you can really do some great stuff. So we're actually built on top of the Microsoft stack, and we're doing some fun things. As a business, LiveTiles has been around for 4.5 years. We're trying to be the second fastest business to $1 billion market cap, second to Slack, and I think we're going to achieve that by the end of the year. So it's a pretty fun journey, and it's fun to, as an Australian company, to bring it to Chicago, and seeing a lot of penetration in this space. So happy to talk to all of you.
Awesome, cool. So again, feel free to raise your hand, ask questions, but to kick things off, there was a kind of a theme. Well, first, I guess the topic that we posted and wanted to talk about was trends in analytics. All the experts that work in this every single day, lecture, write books, blogs, what have you. So one thing that I heard just now is artificial intelligence, machine learning, where that's going, what's going on there. So first question I have is, because of the hype around AI and how that affects anyone in a data role or position or activities we're doing there, what would you say are a few things that companies can be doing right now to kind of be prepared for artificial intelligence and how that might transform the analytics industry? So maybe Alex, we can start with you on that one, since you're in the midst of writing a book about this.
Yeah, and plus even with Rocket Wagon, we work with a lot of enterprise companies in terms of helping them with AI and machine learning as well. So it's interesting because my answer of what are the trends depends on who the audience, like who the people that might use it are. So, because if it's just in general, like where is AI going, the list of things that are like the future of AI are very different than some of the trends today. Like one of the trends, you mentioned the word hype. So one of the things with AI is that the hype supersedes the reality in many ways of what AI can do. And in reality, AI is really in its infancy right now. And what's super interesting is we are at this tipping point where we're starting to see way more actual real world applications. But even then, people still, I think, struggle often to articulate and provide examples and use cases and business cases about what those applications are, and so a lot of people aren't really sure. And plus, they're developing more and more real world applications every day. So I think that one of the trends we're seeing is that the rest of the world is starting to catch up to like, the Silicon Valley folks, like they've been using AI for a while, right? So they're in a different league and doing their own thing. But I think the rest of the world is starting to realize, okay, so there are AI applications that we can pursue, and okay, maybe we can, try and use some of these like, deep learning or machine learning libraries and get some data scientists and start to build recommender engines or do predictive analytics or some of these things. So I think that's one of the trends, is that people are starting to finally, pursue it, and it's not only the big tech companies of Silicon Valley. And as far as your other part, in terms of what can people start to do now, I think just starting to use your data in any way not other than in terms of like, don't also do what's called descriptive analytics, which is more your business intelligence type stuff, which has been very traditional in sort of those enterprise industries like marketing and insurance or whatever, but actually starting to like, don't be afraid, start to try and play around with modeling and, really take it to the next level. I think a lot of people are starting to do that.
Can I piggyback on something that you said? I think it's, on top of that, I think one thing companies can start doing today, regardless of the size, is being mindful of the diversity on their teams or the diversity in any kind of vendors that they're using, because it's still only as good as the people programming it, and you can very easily program or develop in a bias trying to reach. And so, as we kind of develop the space and figure out, to your point, there's a lot of different continuums of what AI is. Some of it is machine learning, there's, deep learning, and I think there was the test in China where, the algorithm actually took one of the medical tests, which I think is, really on that edge of what true AI will become. But even as you're programming that, you can develop a bias the same way as we have that in human beings, the way you raise a child. So I think as we look into how it's gonna affect businesses, making sure that the teams that you have on staff or the vendors that you're using, you're really looking at the individuals that are in the data science team that are doing the programming, coding, and recommendation building, because they're gonna bring an innate bias to it, and if that doesn't reflect your audience, you could potentially be missing out on a connection unintentionally, because everyone kind of just brings what they know to it, and the way I read data is gonna be very different than the way you might read data. And that's important to have that level of diversity on a team to make sure you're building out test models and benchmarking completely to really set good baselines as it grows and develops.
One of the things that we are advising our clients is really before you start talking about artificial intelligence or machine learning or deep learning, you have to look at data. I think it all starts at the data and your understanding of data, the data science that's going, whether your data is coming from Twitter, is it coming from your scientific studies, is coming from your websites, whatever. You need to understand your data before you can apply it, because I don't think you can. We're advising you not to put the cart before the horse, because the bias is not only the biases as the people, but the biases of your systems can also get incorporated into your machine learning. So I think we are really helping our clients focus on data, and then on that build the artificial intelligence, deep learning or machine learning to specific use cases. You can't apply AI, at least not to every problem that you have. So you have to find where your pain points are, where it's gonna be more effective for your organization, not anybody else. So I think you have to look at the business part of it and data part of it first before you can sample and apply this technology to it.
Piggybacking on that one, I'd take a slightly different take, only in that I look at the business process. So when we think about change management in organizations, change is hard, and not because of the technology is relatively easy. Change is hard because of people. People build silos, people resist change, people dig their heels in. But when you make that change valuable to the people in the organization, then you'll find a better level of adoption. So what I typically recommend with my clients is that we start out with almost like a Six Sigma exercise, and we take a look at their business processes and the interplay between people, data, and the machines that the data sits in. And where there are repeatable administrative processes inside the organization, those are potential use cases for AI, or even simple AI, to replace some of the low value but high labor administrative things that people don't like to do. So if you start to take those things off their plate, you can start to impact a level of change management. And this can happen across the organization, whether it's project management, marketing, operations, customer service, etc. So testing and thinking simply about how to replace some of the low value activity inside the organization is just a good place to start.
You said something really interesting, like a couple of things. One about the change management and also the silos. And that's something we struggle with and see all the time, especially with bigger enterprise companies. May not apply as much with you guys, but one of the key things is data democratization, right? And like breaking these silos down, because it's true. The bigger the company gets, the more the data tends to get isolated and people don't want to share it, they want to protect it. And you got the sales data, and you got the transactional data, and the HR data, and the operational data, and the marketing data, and the everybody's data, and it's like all over the place. So then you start talking about, well, okay, we need to get a data warehouse put together so we can do this, you know, amazing, optimized, efficient, super great analytics stuff from the data warehouse. But that's a 2-year project, and by the time you get the buy-in and like the budgets and the cross-departmental alignment and all this, it's like the barriers to entry in terms of pursuing, you know, sort of advanced analytics just keep mounting and mounting, right? And so going back to the question again, and building on what you said in terms of what can you do today, you know, and that's really the, you know, the sort of the way I'm sort of leaning more these days, is first you can do analytics on, whether it's understanding the data, doing exploratory data analysis, or even machine learning or anything. You can do it on your individual data sources, and as you're able to glue things together and tie it all together, that's great. You can learn more and have a more unified understanding. But I think that the whole idea of like it's got to be centralized data before you can do anything. Not as much, I don't think anymore. I think decentralized is fine, and I think you mentioned data lakes. I don't know if you guys are familiar with data warehouses versus data lakes, but it sort of builds on that concept a little. It's still centralized, but it's centralized more as a dumping ground and less as like, you know, having to do a lot of upfront work, and then you can kind of figure out how you want to deal with the data after it's there. So there's a lot of options, but I encourage people just to, you know, try and start to your point, understand the data, work with data. Don't worry about these big infrastructure things, because often they can be just big barriers, really.
So just a clarification on that, you're talking more about working in the more unstructured data environment versus structured data environment, or?
It's not as much, I wasn't necessarily trying to draw, you know, a point on different data types as much as I was drawing on different data sources and trying to, because you might create a data warehouse that includes structured, unstructured, different kinds of data. It's more about, you know, whether you have like a perfect example, right? Unstructured data, for example. Let's say you have a mobile app and you somehow generate feedback from customers by your app, or you get feedback through survey results like survey limits. You know, that text data is unstructured data. You know, you can easily use natural language processing to do stuff like sentiment analysis, part of speech tagging, you know, some topic analysis, you know, and the list goes on and on. Even just word clouds to see like term frequency and things like that, without even trying to tie it to your CRM data to this and that. So it's more that's what I was trying to say.
Yeah.
Yep.
And start with simple questions. You know, to his point, one of the questions I like to start with is often, who do you think your best customer is? And depending on the data sources or the part of the organization, you might get 6 different answers. If you give that data from across the organization to a data scientist and ask them the same question, they're going to find as much value in the metadata and the garbage that people typically throw away than most bits and pieces of the organization would find with their typical historical data analysis. You know, just taking that high structured data and applying the basic rules for LTV or things like that to it.
So maybe if I can build on that a little bit, because one challenge we see when we work with clients, similar where they're siloed teams, everyone's looking at a different view of the same data or just different data. So democratization of data is kind of a big challenge, and yet tremendous value if you can figure it out. Have you guys faced this challenge with your clients? I think the answer is yes, but like how have you overcome it, I guess, is maybe the more important question. Like, what are the best ways to tackle that problem with people living in their own silos? So Alex, maybe we can start with you and learn on the team.
Yeah. Approach, you know, I think it's all about, you know, it's sort of like lean software development, right, or lean manufacturing, like that MVP concept. If you can start small and show value, it's once people start to understand that there really is true value there, it's all about making the case of the why of it all and what the value really is. I think people will start to understand. But if you come in too hot and try and do this whole like, hey, just tear down all the silos, there's such cultural inertia and organizational, lack of organizational readiness and all these things that are forces against moving forward, so it's like a chip. I find that the best way to approach it personally is chip at it.
I think the most interesting experience I've had over the last year with one of the big companies I've worked with, and I actually say this across the board in mid and small-sized companies, and probably in this room, is the amount of data literacy we've all had to learn as adults on the fly over the last 10 years is remarkable. I think and there's so much positive that comes from that. I think one detractor that we aren't fully appreciative of is the power of language, and how we all really have different definitions for the same words, because a lot of us are self-taught. There was not, like this all got figured out pretty off the cuff pretty recently. And so really it's fascinating to me to go in and say, I'm gonna use this word, can we all just talk about what we all think that word means? Because I found that becomes, even before, like even with the quick wins, I've been in rooms where everyone had a different definition of an incredibly simple word, even if this word digital that we throw around, what that means. So for me, it was taking an even bigger step back and saying, there might be so many different definitions because of the way we've learned it or the way we've approached it. Let's all just level in one context on some of the jargon that we're gonna be using so we can actually move forward productively. Because I've been halfway through engagements where we've gone, oh my God, we've been talking about something very different. Or you thought this was a super big deal because the definition you've assigned to this word or idea is very complex, and we were just thinking of this as a very simple, oh no, we're just gonna do a word cloud. Like, no, this wasn't, we were on totally separate pages. And so I think being mindful of the relative newness of everything we're doing, how everyone's really learned it in a lot of different ways, and the definitions that we might be bringing to the table can affect even how you kick off a project.
Might be a good segue to a question I wanted to ask earlier, but kind of deviated away. It's around like teams and talent. So I think, Kim, you mentioned it's all about looking at the individuals, the people you're working with, and your audience. But I guess to ask more broadly, and I'll mention after I ask the question how this relates to your point about making sure we're all on the same page. The question is more, the term data science is popular today, especially data scientist. That is a really hot role, and lots of companies are going for top talent but struggling to hire, or that's kind of flying around. So the question is kind of two parts, like what does a data scientist mean to you guys, and what should people that want to become a data scientist think about or work to build their skills towards? So I wanted to start with Kim, but also Pete, I want to kind of get your perspective, because I know from your background, culture and team and building, especially with your company exploding, is important. So I guess in your organization, you guys have data scientists. What are they doing? What does that term mean to you guys? Or just in general, how do you foster like your top talent and retain top talent?
Foster top talent. So I think this question is not isolated to this field. It's isolated to businesses in general, right? So a lot of my audiences that we end up buying our solution, we were selling to HR because they're trying to address this talent retention problem. They're trying to make sure that they have an environment that they can help people create, I guess, more loyalty to the brand, more loyalty to the company, which is why I think the whole conversational chatbot is creating, I think, a lot of buzz, because now you're tied into finding information easier. You're able to connect with people in different elements. So you imagine joining a company, now you have this onboarding bot that helps you kind of guide you along the journey. So in regards to, I think from a sales standpoint, HR has definitely responded to the demands of talent retention and have tried to find ways to solve that. I do have a question though, and then I'll ask you after this because I know that others want to answer this, but I want to ask the folks in the room really around the ethics of AI. The stuff that we're learning around Facebook with social media, are there lessons that we have in this infancy of AI that we should be doing now as a business as we consult customers, right? Because really, I'm at the tail end of the digital transformation journey. Folks like you and Microsoft have already evolved a customer to the data is ready, their collaboration's ready, their security is all in place, and then we're then launching them with SaaS to be able to launch them further. But is there stuff that we should be doing as an industry right now with ethics? But I know that's not your question.
No, that's it.
But that's something that man, this is such smart people out here. I want to hear their answers.
I mean,
Privacy and security.
go ahead.
We, going back to trends, one of the things that we are talking about, thinking about doing, is combining AI and blockchain, and not blockchain from a cryptocurrency perspective, but more from a data security perspective, because it's got a lot of application around walling off data and partitioning it in smart ways so that you can create more ownership and privacy around personal information, how that information is used, et cetera. It's, you know, GDPR is probably the best thing that will happen to blockchain as a technology over the course of the next 10 years. But when you combine the blockchain and the security of it with AI specifically, it starts to get really interesting. You can start to do some very interesting things when you start to think about insurance companies especially, because of the privacy requirements, banking similarly, because of the privacy requirements that are already in place in those companies, in those industries. There's a high regulatory compliance issue and problem that they have to solve before they implement any technology. So that's,
Yeah, I would actually agree with that. I'm gonna say two parts, because we're on a panel with amazing data experts, so I'm gonna try and take some non-traditional answers as well. But so I worked at a company called Axiom. Axiom is a pure set to like Experian, right? Axiom was the first company to have a chief privacy officer. So when I was leading sales there, one of the best things I can go in and say is data commodity 100%. Are you having meetings where everyone's talking about the same thing and you all experience this every day, just the stuff that we read? Absolutely. Can I stand in front of you and say that we have a chief privacy officer, we have a code of ethics, we work with the government, and we'd actually like to be more conservative than you could even imagine, because for us, a data breach or lack of data privacy is worse than even a business outcome. And so I think on the one side, what can we be doing today is one, to your point, really that focus on security and privacy, but even as a small business, have an ethics code. Like, take the time, the same way you write your mission and vision statement, and write your privacy and your ethics code on what data and security and privacy means to you, and let that evolve over time, because that's really, when we talk about like human connect, I mean, that's the stuff that's gonna differentiate your company, is the way that you look at it and view it. And the best way to do that is to say, I took the time as an organization to have a code of ethics when it comes to privacy security. The second thing, and I'll go back to the diversity, I know there's fields and degrees evolving where it's this combination of philosophy and data science, because we are gonna get into, I mean, we're kind of hitting this commoditization, in my opinion, of technology, and we're kind of doing everything we can do, and now we're playing with bits and pieces. And I think the game changer is the application of it. And I would love to see, I imagine what we're gonna see as this kind of levels off is an emergence of arts and science and philosophy and people that have very kind of soft backgrounds come in and get really creative with applications and the way you look at them. And I say philosophy because there's this deep idea of ethics, and ethics is in politics, and how do you bridge that into data. And so I think from a hiring perspective, it's gonna be challenging for the HR teams, because they're really gonna have to get outside the box and maybe bring someone in that has a background in, ethics or something different, and then teach them data science. Because I think that's where you're gonna start differentiating as an organization. That's kind of the X factor.
Is that going to be governed by business or by government, right? So the ethics of it is, do we need to have a council across multiple governments to say, this is what you can do with AI, don't put it on drones to bomb people, like, how do you govern that?
I think it's gonna come from Europe. I don't think the US is gonna be leading us. It's gonna come from Europe. And I'm happy about it. Yeah, and I'm actually really happy about it, because I think there should be governance. Absolutely. I don't think companies should be, I think we're getting into a monopoly situation. And I'd be curious actually about your opinion as well, given pharma and everything that you've seen in the big companies you work with. But I do think that we're gonna see the privacy, the regulation be driven by Europe. I don't see the US stepping in and leading that. And I think because we're in global organizations and in a global world, we'll just absorb it and adapt to it. And so I think staying up to date on what the EU is doing and what's going on in Brussels is gonna be huge for the US.
Do you think that's, quick question here, do you think that's gonna happen before something happens? like a breach of AI and privacy, or is it going to be kind of as a reaction to something that might occur? Because you mentioned GDPR really sinking in 5-10 years as far as like other applications from it. I'm more just curious, do we foresee in the next year or two governments and these regulations coming out for AI, because AI is already prevalent now in some regards.
I imagine it'll parallel path. I mean, I think Europe's driving it, and they're pushing it because they're trying to get in front of it, and they are a more proactive society. The US tends to be a little bit more reactive, like let something happen and then, kind of litigate or solve it after the fact. So I think we're gonna see issues happen while that regulation starts globally, really driven by Europe, and then US citizens will drive the adoption because we're being affected by it. So